Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett, and welcome to a new episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. I call this episode, Aliens Are Us. In this episode I'd like to explore our relationship with the ETs. How is it that greys are able to interbreed with humans? Are greys related to us in any way? Are they time travelers from the future? Are they our ancestors? Why is it that there are so many cases involving humanoid ETs? And what about the cases of ETs that look just like us, human-looking ETs? All of these raise serious questions about our relationship to the ETs and point towards the probability that our relationship with them is much closer than we might imagine. I have about a dozen cases I'd like to present that speak towards our relationship with the ETs. And I think each of them provides some insights into how closely related we are to them. So let's just dive in. And the first case I'd like to talk about comes from Whitley Strieber. Whitley Strieber needs no real introduction. He's a very well-known contactee and has written a bunch of books about his experiences and other people's experiences. And he presents the case of a lady who had a very interesting encounter with ETs that sort of looks towards this question. And I'll just quote Whitley Strieber directly. As he says, one witness, pregnant, was reading in bed one night in 1957 when troll-like figures entered into her room. When she grew terrified, the leader said, as if to reassure her, "We aren't interested in you, but in the girl child you're carrying." This witness cried out to the ETs that they were hideously ugly, and the leader replied to the witness, "Just wait, my dear. One day you will look exactly like us." So this unusual exchange, Whitley Strieber points out, might tell us something about ourselves and the ETs by showing, and I quote, "The incredible intimacy and strangeness of the whole contact experience is as likely to mean that we don't know what we are as it is to suggest that the visitors are extraterrestrial." Another researcher who has cases like these is Karla Turner. She's a very well-known experiencer and researcher who's written a number of really well-received books on this phenomenon. And she presents the case of a lady she calls Anita. Anita is from Texas. She's had experiences her whole life, including face-to-face contact, sightings, onboard encounters, and telepathic contact. And during one instance of telepathic contact, Anita was given a very interesting message which basically consisted of 6 letters. And the letters were I, R, U, U, R, I. And of course, if you read that phonetically, that translates into I, R, U, U, R, I. So this is very interesting because it's basically saying that ETs and humans are one and the same. And this is a message that keeps turning up. Karla Turner presents another case from an abductee in Texas by the name of Lisa, who's also had experiences her whole life and received a very interesting telepathic message from the ETs. This was in August of 1993, when the ETs told Lisa that, quote, "They have been genetically altering us gradually." She was shown ape-like creatures and then heard a voice say, "They are you and you are them." This fascinated Karla Turner because it was very close to the message that Anita had received. And as Karla Turner writes, even the grammar is incorrect in both cases. Another case that I'd like to present comes from Kim Carlsberg, a well-known Southern California-based UFO experiencer. She's written a very good book called Beyond My Wildest Dreams about her own experiences. And she had a really interesting lucid alien dream that again brought up this idea that our relationship with ETs is much closer than just us and them. As Kim Carlsberg writes of her dream, and I quote, "The eyes returned. I felt them stare deep within me, and a voice spoke a phrase that chilled my very core. You are us." I had a startling and profound experience, a realization, a knowing that we are all one consciousness, one mind, one being. I have never felt anything to be more genuine than that moment. I guess I had a religious experience, but why do I feel this had something to do with the Greys? It doesn't make sense, or maybe I don't want it to. Another researcher who has a case about this sort of thing is Dr. David Jacobs, PhD, a leading researcher into UFO abductions, and he presents the case of Reshma Kamal, a woman from India who actually grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and has had UFO experiences her entire life. Under hypnotic regression, Reshma Kamal had a very interesting experience which answered some of these questions. And I'll just quote David Jacobs directly. As David Jacobs writes, "During a mind scan procedure with an insect-like alien, Reshma Kamal was told that she was one of them. When she protested, the insect-like alien told her a plan is going to take place and she would be in it that way. Reshma was told that the future would be a very different place and that most people would be confused and frightened, but that Kamal would be okay because she was, quote, one of them and part of the plan." Many cases speak towards this. Another comes from Jim Walden. He's a contactee from Arkansas who wrote a book about his experiences called The Ultimate Alien Agenda. In 1992, Jim Walden experienced his first fully conscious face-to-face contact with ETs, in which he believes he was taken to an underground base. This caused him to reevaluate many experiences in his own life, and he realized he was a contactee. And as a result, he sought out researcher Barbara Bartholic, who ended up putting Jim Walden under hypnotic regression. And Jim Walden recalled many, many experiences. And during her hypnotic regressions, Barbara Bartholic asked Jim Walden about humanity's relationship with the ETs. And one day, sometime later, Jim Walden was listening to his own hypnotic regression tapes and had a very interesting experience in which he started receiving telepathic answers to the questions that Barbara Bartholic had previously asked him. And I'll just quote Jim Walden directly, because he says this was perhaps the most significant event in my alien odyssey. And as Jim Walden says, and I quote, "I read the statements she made on the tape. I felt a peculiar sensation in my head, and I suddenly knew the answers to the questions. Barbara Bartholic provided a mental key that fit a locked area in my brain, and then the lock opened. The only words in my brain were, 'They are us.' I couldn't process any other thoughts. Alien beings are present with us so often because they are us." What's very interesting is Walden recalled that he himself was of alien genetic heritage. He believes he is a hybrid. This doesn't surprise me at all because this is something many contactees have remembered or were told or believe, that they themselves have actual alien genetics, which again shows that our relationship to the ETs is far, far closer than many people might believe. And Jim Walden believes that the answer to the UFO mystery and their origins and our origins lies in this direction. And that we are all human alien hybrids or were genetically engineered by the ETs. This is certainly possible. There's a lot of ancient writings from the Bible and all different cultures. Many indigenous cultures talk about legends where they believe they were directly genetically related to the ETs, that the ETs are basically our ancestors. So it could be that we are all ETs. And as Jim Walden writes, he believes the UFO mystery may lie in this direction and not in the direction that many people are looking for. As he writes, and I quote, "I don't think we'll be able to discover the reality of alien beings as long as we have a them versus us mentality. Before we can understand their existence, we must discover the truth of ours. Some of the aliens I met were multi-dimensional aspects of myself." It's a theme that turns up again and again. Another case comes from Druffle, a Southern California-based researcher who investigated a case which took place in Palos Verdes, California, where two men were abducted by what appear to be gray-type ETs. One of the gentlemen was told by the ETs that they are from Zeta Reticula, and I'll just quote this experiencer directly. As he writes, "The Zeta Reticulans are our cultural ancestors. Millennia ago, they participated in converting Earth's ape men to Homo sapiens through genetic manipulation." One very famous case that talks about this is that of Betty Andreason, a UFO experiencer from Massachusetts. She's had many books written about her case by Raymond Fowler, a pioneering and well-respected researcher. Betty Andreason was told by the ETs that not the reason that they are doing genetic manipulation is not only to save their own species and help them reproduce, but because humanity is on a pathway towards becoming sterile. The ETs told Betty that humans and ETs are of, quote, the same substance. This particular statement really intrigued Raymond Fowler because it answered the question, how is it that the Greys are able to interbreed with humans? And the implication is that humans and Greys share the same genetics. So this led Fowler to really question our relationship to the ETs. And as Raymond Fowler writes, could it be possible that alien life forms have really been living in such a clandestine relationship with man? Are the so-called watchers dependent on us to perpetuate their own species? And if so, it becomes quite obvious that their very survival is intimately linked with the success of their ongoing genetic engineering program. One cannot also help but wonder when this symbiotic kinship with man originally came to be. How could man be genetically compatible with an alien being? Another researcher who's looked extensively into this is Dr. Michael Swords. He's a very well-known and pioneering researcher. And Dr. Michael Swords became intrigued into the idea that Greys might be genetically linked to humans because the fact is their appearance looks very much like fetal humans. And he began to sort of theorize the possibility that Greys are essentially humans, but have used a process known as neoteny. Neoteny is a biological process whereby a species retains its fetal characteristics long into adulthood. This is something that's actually quite prominent in many species, particularly in insect and amphibious species. And as Michael Swords writes, neoteny allows the fetal or larval form of a species to bypass normal development in some circumstances, which results in essentially a new creature. And although the DNA is the same, the, quote, new species looks very different. So he's wondering, basically, if grays are humans, but in mature but fetal form. As he writes, and I quote, "Through genetic engineering, our future descendants could bypass neoteny by natural selection and easily produce human beings of small stature and large heads, similar to the aliens being reported. The fetal head, allowed to develop and grow in an artificial womb, would significantly increase the size and capability of the new Homo sapiens." In other words, Dr. Michael Swords is saying that we humans might evolve into beings that look very much like the grays. And this is an idea that has been taken up by other researchers. Among them is Michael Masters. Michael Masters has written a very well-received book called Identified Flying Objects, in which he puts forth the theory that ETs are humans from the future, time travelers from the future. This is a theory that has gained some popularity. And it's interesting how he came up with this concept. Michael Masters was at home one day when his father brought home the book Communion by Whitley Strieber. And Michael Masters saw the cover of the book with the gray ET and had a very strong intuitive flash in which he saw three images. The first image was a primate, the second was a modern human, and the third was a gray alien. They were all next to each other, and the implication was that humans evolved from primitive primates to modern humans and will one day become grays as we know of them. And so this is how he developed the theory that grays might be time travelers from the future. And this is all in his book, Identified Flying Objects. It's an interesting book, and it raises some interesting points. What's, I think, most interesting about the book is it points towards there being a very close relationship between humans and ETs. I don't know if it presents a convincing argument of time travelers from the future, because he presents few actual first-hand cases in which ETs have told this to people or proved this in any way. And I certainly scoured the literature looking for any cases which would point towards ETs being time travelers from the future. And while there are, or might be, a few cases that might point towards this, I couldn't find any that were really solid. So I don't know if that's the case, that ETs are time travelers from the future, because the evidence just doesn't support this. But what it does support is the possibility that we might evolve towards grays, or that some grays, might have once looked very much like us, which is basically what the experiencer in the Whitley Strieber case was told, and which does turn up in other cases. So perhaps the grays do, in fact, have the same genetics as humans, and that is why, as Raymond Fowler says, they are able to interbreed with us. So there are other cases that speak towards us having a close relationship with the ETs. There are many cases, in fact, where experiences are told that they are, in fact, extraterrestrial, whether they were ETs in a past life, perhaps. That seems to be the implication. That's certainly what Sarah Shaw was told in the Tujunga Canyon Contacts, written by Ann Druffle and D. Scott Rogo. Another lady was told that same exact thing. That case comes from Brad Steiger in his book, The UFO Abductors. A California-based abductee by the name of Natalie was taken on board, and the ETs told her, and I quote, "They said that I had once been as they now appeared to me." So once again, we have this implication that ETs and us are the same. And one fact that has always been very interesting to me is the fact that there are human-looking ETs, because that raises serious questions about human evolution. Did we even evolve on this planet? If there are ETs out there that look just like us, where did they come from? And where did we come from? Because the theory of evolution, while very popular, is not fact. We don't know for sure that we, in fact, evolved from primitive primates. And there's a very interesting book out there called Humans Are Not From Earth, written by Ellis Silver. This is a very large book, 500 some pages. It's gotten mixed reviews, but it does raise some very interesting points that humans are not particularly well adapted to Earth. The gravity seems to be a little bit too heavy. Many people suffer from back problems. He also points out that sunlight itself is very damaging to humans. Many animals on Earth have what is known as nictitating eyes, or eyes with double membranes, multiple eyelids. Humans do not. And we suffer very badly from all kinds of eye problems, such as cataracts. This is one of the theories Ellis Silver puts forth, that there are many biological aspects about us that are different from animals and not well suited to Earth. Most animals are able to forage naturally for food, eating raw meats and raw foods of all kinds, while humans cannot. Often we have to prepare our food. He also points out that we are hairless, unlike most animals, and we can only survive in a very narrow temperature range. We also suffer from a very wide range of diseases and allergies and all sorts of things. So he presents sort of an argument, a case that humans might not have evolved on Earth. It's a very interesting book, and I think it's worth definitely taking a look at, though again, it has gotten some pretty mixed reviews. So those are the cases that I could find which sort of point towards our relationship with ETs. And I did have my own experience with this. I wouldn't really call myself a contactee. I have had some sightings. I've had some really interesting alien dreams. And I did have a weird experience, which I'll call a download. I've heard many contactees talk about how they've received telepathic messages from the ETs. And I have had that experience. And I did have this one unusual experience with what appears to be a download. At the time, I was really meditating a lot on who are the Greys and what is our relationship to them. And I was laying down one afternoon when this vision entered into my head. It was not a dream. I was fully awake, and yet I could see it in full living color. It was really unusual. And what I saw was the face of a gentleman, a normal human-looking guy, and it was quickly replaced by another image of the same man, only he was now bald. And then there was another image of the same gentleman, except now that his facial features looked slightly damaged. His nose had started to disappear. His ears had fallen off. His lips had become smaller. It looked as if he had had genetic damage from radiation, much like we've seen in Holocaust victims, from the nuclear Holocaust. And this first image of the normal human-looking male was followed by a series of about 100 other images, one after another, flipping through very quickly like a deck of cards, showing how a normal human-looking male became genetically damaged and ended up looking exactly like a gray ET, with the large, dark eyes, the large head, the hairless head, the small nose and lips and ears, and so forth. So the implication was that Greys are essentially human. And I think this may in fact be true, because this is the message a number of contactees have been given. That's the case. There's a case in my latest book, Wondrous, which the ETs basically told her that they once looked like human beings. So that could be absolutely what's going on here. Greys may look alien, but in fact, they are human like us, but just genetically damaged. I don't know, we're still at the point of speculating. I wrote about these above cases in my book, Not From Here, Volume 2. And I think the important thing is to realize that there are human-looking ETs, and that ETs in general are reported in humanoid form. Even when it comes to praying mantis ETs, they look humanoid. And for that matter, the praying mantis ETs have their own counterpart here on Earth with the praying mantis insect. So perhaps genetics are universal throughout the galaxy and throughout the universe. Perhaps genetics is basically the template that is used by entities throughout the physical three-dimensional universe. I don't know, hard to say. This is speculation, but it does answer the question that I'm asked so often is, who do you think the Greys are and what is our relationship to them? And my conclusion is that the relationship between us and the Greys is probably far closer than we realize. They are perhaps our ancestors, or certainly much more closely related to us than we might at first think. So that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I want to thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. And until next time, keep having fun.